because some guys get into the hassle so big they can't do anything else. They can't shake hands with another person or reach out to another human being.
The worst thing, of course, is it backfired. Everybody wanted to know what I was apologizing for.
For decades, Paul Newman was the gold standard of Hollywood grace. Those ice blue eyes, that calm, magnetic screen presence. The man seemed untouchable, too dignified to ever get caught up in petty rivalries or Hollywood gossip. But behind the polished smile and polite interviews, Newman was keeping score, quietly, sharply. And he never forgot who pushed him too far. Toward the end of his life, as he battled illness and looked back on 5 decades of stardom, Newman did something no one expected. He made a list, not of his favorite roles, not of his greatest achievements. A private, brutally honest list of the 7 actors he couldn't stand. Some had insulted his values. Others had wasted the kind of talent he believed was sacred. A few simply drove him crazy with ego, politics, or a total lack of professionalism. But they all had one thing in common. They crossed a line Paul Newman refused to tolerate. This wasn't some angry rant or dramatic outburst. Newman never spoke publicly about it. He never confronted anyone on camera or threw shade in interviews. But in private, with close friends, trusted directors, and his wife, Joanne Woodward, he was clear. There were people he could work with and people he'd never work with again. And now, years after his death, that list has finally surfaced. Through rare interviews, off-the-record conversations, and a bombshell 2022 biography, the 7 names are out. And they aren't random B-listers. They're some of the biggest icons in Hollywood history. From action stars and Oscar winners to Newman's own co-stars and even his closest friend. So, what does it take to make a man like Paul Newman snap? What kind of behavior, what kind of betrayal could turn Hollywood's most even-tempered actor into someone who quietly blacklisted you forever? Today, we're peeling back the charm, the legend, and the public image, and revealing the private truths Paul Newman never wanted to air. Because sometimes, the most admired men hold the deepest grudges. And sometimes, those grudges tell you more about a man's values than his awards ever could.
I guess I may have been competitive about acting at one point in my life. I'm certainly not competitive anymore.
On the surface, Paul Newman was everything Hollywood wished all its stars could be. He was disciplined. He was kind. He gave away hundreds of millions through his food company, supported civil rights when it wasn't trendy, and somehow never seemed to let fame poison his soul. He wasn't chasing tabloid headlines or throwing tantrums on set. To the public, Newman was the gentleman of the silver screen, a man who brought quiet intensity to his roles and quiet dignity to his life. But that's only half the story. Because behind that charm and composure was a man with lines he wouldn't let anyone cross. And once you did, there was no going back. Newman believed in work, not celebrity, not chaos, not status games. The work. He memorized his lines. He showed up early. He stayed focused. And he expected everyone else to do the same. No exceptions, no excuses. If you didn't take the craft seriously, if you brought your ego or your politics to the set in a way that poisoned the environment, Newman took it personally. He might never say it out loud. He might still shake your hand or finish the movie. But you were done in his eyes. Quietly, permanently, done.
I never really cared that much.
Number 7, Tom Cruise. You'd think Paul Newman and Tom Cruise would have been a dream team. Old Hollywood charm meets fresh-faced energy. When they starred together in The Color of Money in 1986, a Martin Scorsese film that finally earned Newman his long-overdue Oscar, audiences saw chemistry, charisma, and generational power. But behind the scenes, things weren't so smooth. Because while the cameras captured magic, Newman was quietly grinding his teeth. It wasn't that Tom Cruise was rude, or lazy, or incompetent. In fact, he was the opposite. He was hyper-prepared, intensely focused, always on. And that was the problem. Cruise, just breaking into superstardom, came to set like a man on fire. He worshipped Newman, told everyone how honored he was to work with him, But for Newman, it was too much. He didn't want fanboy energy. He didn't want someone bouncing around reciting motivational speeches between takes. He wanted calm, focus, respect for the silence between the words. Cruise was just too loud. According to producer Richard Zanuck, Newman once said Tom's energy never landed. He was constantly in motion, constantly promoting himself, and couldn't just sit in the scene and breathe. What really set Newman off, though, wasn't the on-set performance. It was the off-set publicity. During the film's press tour, Cruise couldn't stop talking about his fitness routine, about his admiration for Newman, about how much he was learning. And every time he interrupted Paul during a joint interview, it chipped away at that famous patience. Martin Scorsese later told a story that summed it all up. After one junket, Newman pulled him aside and, with that signature dry wit, said, "If that kid tells people one more time how much he's learning from me, I might throw him out a window." It was a joke, but not really. The irritation was real. Publicly, Newman stayed gracious. He told reporters that Cruise had abundant energy, letting the sarcasm hang between the lines. But those who knew Newman well say the color of money confirmed something he'd always feared about the next generation of stars. That fame would become louder than craft. That promotion would replace preparation. And that the work, the sacred gritty work, would get lost under a pile of sound bites. Tom Cruise earned his spot on Newman's list, not because he lacked talent, but because he brought too much noise. And Paul Newman, above all else, believed in silence, in stillness, in doing the job without making a show of it. For him, Cruise didn't just represent a co-star, he represented a changing era, one he didn't entirely trust. Number 6. Charlton Heston. Paul Newman never shared a single scene with Charlton Heston. They never acted together, never sat side by side on a film set, and yet Heston still made the list. Because for Newman, the clash wasn't about shared screen time. It was about ideology. And no one in Hollywood symbolized the ideological opposite of Paul Newman more than Charlton Heston. To the public, Heston was the man who parted the Red Sea, the face of American epics like Ben-Hur and the Ten Commandments. But to Newman, he was something entirely different, the man who used his fame to push values Newman couldn't stomach. In the 1960s, while Newman marched for civil rights and spoke out against the Vietnam War, Heston was moving steadily in the other direction, toward gun rights, conservative politics, and eventually the presidency of the NRA. Newman didn't just disagree with Heston's beliefs, he saw them as dangerous, as irresponsible. According to his wife, Joanne Woodward, few people in the industry irritated Paul more than Heston. He couldn't reconcile the Moses he saw on screen with the man behind the speeches, she said in a rare interview. The turning point came during the 1966 campaign season, when both men supported opposing presidential candidates. Newman threw his energy behind Eugene McCarthy, an anti-war progressive. Heston, meanwhile, backed the pro-war side. One night, by sheer coincidence, the two ended up in the same restaurant. Newman saw him, said nothing, refused to acknowledge him. The cold shoulder wasn't accidental, it was intentional. Robert Vaughn, a friend of Newman and fellow liberal actor, said Newman believed deeply in the responsibility that came with visibility. To Paul, actors weren't just entertainers. They were public figures with influence. And when that influence was used to promote violence or division, it crossed a moral line. Newman never attacked Heston publicly. But in 1978, when asked in an interview about actors who confuse performance with morality, he gave a loaded quote, "Some people confuse having played great men with being great men. I find that problematic." No one had any doubts about who he meant. Heston wasn't on the list because he flubbed lines or showed up late. He was there because he represented everything Paul Newman refused to become. A man who wrapped political extremism in the cloak of Hollywood heroism and expected no one to question it. Number 5. Frank Sinatra. You'd think Paul Newman would have admired Frank Sinatra. After all, they were both icons, both symbols of cool in their own way. But to Newman, cool meant control. discipline. Showing up and giving a damn. And that's where the admiration stopped. Because Frank Sinatra's version of cool, the late arrivals, the casual flippancy, the do-it-in-one-take-and-leave attitude, was exactly what Newman couldn't stand. Their only major collaboration came in 1980 on the disaster movie When Time Ran Out. It wasn't exactly a career highlight for either man, but the experience left a lasting impression, and not a good one. Sinatra's reputation for calling the shots followed him onto that set. He'd stroll in hours late, skip rehearsals, refuse second takes. And Newman, who'd show up early with his lines memorized, watched in disbelief. Director James Goldstone, who worked with both men, recalled the tension clearly. Paul took preparation seriously. He respected the crew's time. Frank, he treated it like a nightclub gig. In and out, no sweat. Things boiled over one morning when Sinatra arrived almost 3 hours late. William Holden, another co-star, later said Newman never raised his voice. He didn't have to. He walked up to Sinatra and said plainly, "You're disrespecting everyone who's been waiting." Sinatra didn't respond, and from that moment on, the two barely exchanged a word. Newman's frustration wasn't about ego, it was about the work. He believed every person on set, from lead actor to lighting tech, deserved your full attention. That you honored their time by being professional, and to watch someone coast through relying on fame instead of effort, that to Newman was unforgivable. Years later, when asked about Sinatra in a rare interview, Newman didn't even mention their film together. He just said, "Frank has a lovely singing voice." That was it. No praise. No warmth. Just a cold, clinical dismissal. The kind you give someone who failed your test. For Newman, talent was never enough. What mattered was how you used it. And Sinatra, in his eyes, had all the talent in the world and wasted it on shortcuts. Number 4. Marlon Brando. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't rivalry. Paul Newman didn't hate Marlon Brando because he stole roles or got better press. In fact, they were rarely on screen at the same time and never in the same film. But Brando still landed high on Newman's list, not because he wronged him, but because he let him down. In Newman's early years, Brando was the measuring stick, the gold standard of American acting. When Newman emerged from the same actor's studio system, people called him the next Brando. At first, that was a compliment. But as the years passed, Newman watched something he couldn't forgive. Brando throwing away what Newman saw as the rarest gift in their profession: genius. According to Robert Redford, Newman once said watching Brando's late career performances felt like watching someone burn a Picasso for heat. It wasn't just about missed lines or lazy posture. It was about someone who had redefined acting and then, in Newman's eyes, stopped caring. The stories infuriated him. Brando reading lines off cue cards, refusing rehearsals, holding up production because he was bored. For Newman, who prepared meticulously for every role, that kind of casual disregard wasn't just sloppy, it was offensive. Eva Marie Saint, who co-starred with Newman in Exodus, said it best. "Paul believed you owed your best to everyone. Your co-stars, the crew, the audience. He took pride in showing up prepared. And Brando, despite his legendary status, violated that unspoken pact. He turned artistry into performance art, grit into gimmick." Newman never said it outright, but those close to him believe he saw Brando as a warning, a cautionary tale of what happens when talent is treated like a burden instead of a responsibility. In one of his final interviews, Newman was asked about gifted actors who fell short. His answer was simple. Great talent comes with great responsibility. Not everyone understands that. He never named Brando, but everyone knew who he meant. For Paul Newman, disappointment ran deeper than dislike. Brando wasn't just another name on a list. He was a reminder that brilliance without discipline meant nothing. And that no matter how bright you burned, it didn't excuse walking away from the flame. Number 3. Steve McQueen. They were both icons, both cool, both kings of the 1960s box office. And when The Towering Inferno brought Paul Newman and Steve McQueen together in 1974, Hollywood expected sparks. But not the kind that actually flew behind the scenes. The trouble started before the cameras even rolled. McQueen, known for his obsession with status and screen time, made a list of demands so detailed it bordered on absurd. He wanted equal billing, equal pay, the same number of lines, even the same number of stairs to climb in the film's burning skyscraper. Newman, ever the professional, didn't protest publicly, but the eye rolls were hard to hide. It got worse. The film's credits became a battleground. McQueen refused to let his name appear below Newman's. Newman refused to be bumped down either. The result? A bizarre compromise. McQueen's name appeared first but lower on the screen, while Newman's was higher but second. A visual tie designed to satisfy two fragile egos. Except Newman didn't care about ego. He cared about time, about effort, about showing up, doing the work, and leaving the rest behind. And to him, McQueen wasn't doing that. John Guillermin, the film's director, later said working with the two men was like directing oil and water. Steve saw every film as a fight. Paul saw it as a craft. While Newman quietly focused on his performance, McQueen was behind the scenes measuring dialogue, counting close-ups, and making sure no one, not even Paul Newman, got more attention. It grated on Newman. He never raised his voice, never complained in the press, but his quotes told the story. In a 2002 interview, Newman said, "Some actors see every film as a competition. I always saw it as a collaboration. Those two approaches don't mix well." Faye Dunaway, who had worked with both men, summed it up more bluntly, "Paul wanted to make great movies, Steve wanted to win." That clash of purpose, one man chasing legacy, the other chasing leverage, made working together nearly impossible. They never worked together again. And while fans still remember the towering inferno as a blockbuster, Newman remembered it as something else. The moment he realized that even among legends, professionalism wasn't guaranteed, and that sometimes the biggest fight on set wasn't with fire, it was with ego. Number 2. John Wayne. If Paul Newman had a nemesis in Hollywood, it wasn't someone he sparred with on set. It was someone who stood on the opposite end of the American cultural spectrum. John Wayne, the symbol of rugged patriotism, conservative values, and old-school masculinity, was everything Newman wasn't. And the tension between them wasn't subtle. It was political, personal, and permanent. They never worked together, never traded lines on screen, but their conflict played out in press interviews, campaign rallies, and whispered comments that never made it to air. During the Vietnam War, Wayne proudly supported U.S. military involvement. Newman? He was marching in the streets, raising money for anti-war candidates, and criticizing the film industry's role in glorifying conflict. And nothing infuriated him more than the Green Berets, Wayne's 1968 pro-war epic that Newman reportedly called military propaganda. Filmmaker Arthur Penn, a close friend of Newman's, said the divide was philosophical. Paul saw Wayne as a man stuck in the past, romanticizing war, simplifying politics, turning complex realities into cowboy fantasies. The frustration wasn't just about the movies, it was about responsibility. Newman believed actors with their massive platforms owed the public more than slogans and swagger. And when John Wayne won the Academy Award for True Grit in 1970, while Newman had already been nominated multiple times with no wins, the irritation deepened. Publicly, he congratulated Wayne. Privately, he questioned whether playing the same role in every film really deserved the industry's highest honor. In a rare candid moment during the 1970s, Newman was asked what he thought of Wayne's career. He paused, smiled faintly, and said, "I admire his success, but John Wayne plays John Wayne in every movie. I've always tried to play someone different." It wasn't just a critique. It was a declaration of values. Despite the political venom, Newman never lost sight of Wayne's impact. After Wayne died in 1979, Newman spoke with nuance. "We disagreed on practically everything. But you can't deny he was an American institution. Sometimes institutions make you uncomfortable. That doesn't make them less significant." It was the most Paul Newman response imaginable. Honest, cutting, but fair. Still, the divide remained. Wayne wasn't just a name on a list, he was a symbol. A monument to everything Newman believed the industry should outgrow. And when Paul drew that invisible line in the sand, John Wayne was already standing on the other side. Number 1. Robert Redford. No one expected this name to top the list. Not fans, not critics, not even Redford himself. Because for decades, Paul Newman and Robert Redford were the golden duo. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the Sting, the definition of on-screen chemistry. They laughed together, built a public friendship that lasted a lifetime. But behind the scenes, Redford was the one who got under Newman's skin more than anyone else. And not because of ego, or politics, or talent, but because of something much simpler: time. Redford was always late. Not maliciously, not defiantly, just late. It was his nature, his rhythm. He didn't wear a watch, he didn't believe in strict call times. But to Newman, punctual, prepared, and precise, it was maddening. Director George Roy Hill, who helmed both Butch Cassidy and The Sting, said Newman treated schedules like gospel. He'd be on set at 6 a.m. sharp, fully prepped, fully focused, and then we'd all wait for Bob. It became a joke among the crew. On The Sting, they gave Newman a novelty clock. The numbers were replaced with one word: Redford. No matter what time it was always Redford o'clock, time to wait. The irony, though, is what made it so frustrating. Because once Redford finally arrived, he was brilliant, effortless. First take, nailed. It drove Newman crazy. The worst thing about this kid, he once said, half laughing, half serious, is that he can show up 3 hours late and still be better than most actors after a week of rehearsals. That wasn't a compliment. That was pure, blistering honesty. But Newman never let it show in public. He respected Redford's talent, admired his activism, genuinely cared for him as a person. But on set, that casual, free-spirited approach clashed hard with Newman's disciplined process, and over time it wore on him. In later years, Redford acknowledged the tension with his usual charm. "Paul and I were opposites," he said in a 2015 interview. "He was the clock, I was the wind." But maybe that's why it worked. Newman, at an AFI tribute, put it even better. "Working with Robert Redford taught me patience. I had none before. I needed all of it with him." So why was Redford number 1? Because he was the only one who tested Newman's limits constantly and still mattered enough to stay in his life. The others, he walked away from. But Redford, he stayed. And maybe that's what made it so hard. When your closest friend drives you the craziest, that's not just conflict, that's family. At first glance, Paul Newman's secret list looks like a collection of grudges, 7 names, 7 reasons to be bitter. But if you step back, it becomes clear. It's not really about the actors. It's about the values, about what Newman stood for, what he refused to tolerate, and how he measured success in a business built on ego. According to his daughter Melissa, the list wasn't something he waved around. It wasn't a vendetta. It was private, honest. A way for her father to take stock of his journey as he grew older, as he battled the illness that would eventually take his life in 2008. He had very clear ideas about the responsibility that came with being successful, she said in a rare interview. It wasn't about being a star. It was about doing the work, respecting the people around you, respecting the audience. And when people treated the job like a joke or used their fame carelessly, it really bothered him. Newman didn't expect perfection. He made mistakes too. But what set him apart was his refusal to let success become an excuse. He didn't care how many Oscars you had, how many headlines you got, or how many millions your movies made. If you disrespected the process, if you made it harder for others to do their jobs, he noticed. And he remembered. The list surfaced gradually after Newman's death, as friends, co-stars, and biographers began piecing together decades of off-the-record conversations. The final puzzle clicked in 2022, when a comprehensive biography revealed the full picture: names, reasons, and stories that had once been whispered in confidence. But what's striking isn't the negativity. It's the consistency, the patterns. Each name on the list violated one of Newman's core beliefs: professionalism, preparation, purpose. And once you cross that line, even if you were a legend, even if you were his best friend, you were never quite the same in his eyes. Director Stuart Rosenberg, who worked with Newman on Cool Hand Luke, said it best. Paul had strong likes and dislikes, but he never brought them to set. He showed up, he worked hard, and he gave everyone the same respect, whether he liked them or not. That was the line he never crossed, even when others did. Newman's list wasn't a secret hit piece. It was a quiet code, a way of saying, this is what I stood for, this is what I couldn't forgive. And in a business where values often get blurred by fame, that code might be the most revealing part of all. In the end, Paul Newman's secret list wasn't about hate. It wasn't about pettiness. It was about principle. Each name he included wasn't there because of one bad day or a single argument. They were there because they broke something deeper: his trust in the craft, in the code he lived by. And that's what makes the list so compelling. Not the gossip, not the drama, but what it reveals about a man who could have coasted on charm, but chose conviction instead. Newman never went public with the list. He didn't use it to shame or sabotage anyone. He didn't leak it to tabloids or drop passive-aggressive lines in interviews. He simply carried it with him, quietly, like a map of lessons learned the hard way. It was personal, private, a mirror he held up not just to others but to himself. And maybe that's why, even now, it still matters. Because it reminds us that even legends have limits. Even the most admired people in the room can be pushed too far. What made Newman different was how he responded. He didn't explode, he didn't broadcast. He simply remembered and moved forward with clarity. The list also offers a rare insight into how Newman measured greatness, not by box office numbers or magazine covers, but by how seriously you took the work, how you treated the people around you, how you showed up, not just when the lights were on, but in the quiet hours when no one was watching. To Newman, that's where character lived, and that's where the line was drawn. And perhaps the most surprising part? Even some of the people on the list respected it. When Robert Redford learned he was number one, he didn't get defensive. He laughed. And then he said, "I'm honored to have been important enough to irritate him that much." That's what real respect looks like, when someone can call you out and you admire them more for it. Paul Newman's story has always been about more than movies. It's about grace under pressure, integrity in silence, kindness with boundaries. His list wasn't a rejection of the people on it. It was a reflection of how much he believed in something bigger than all of them: the craft, the responsibility, the legacy. So maybe that's the lesson. In a world obsessed with celebrity feuds and viral sound bites, Newman reminds us of something quieter, but far more powerful: that values matter. And even if you never say them out loud, the people who know you best will hear them loud and clear. Paul Newman didn't need headlines to make a statement. He didn't need confrontation to take a stand. His list wasn't loud, but it was honest. And now that it's come to light, it tells us more about him than any trophy or tribute ever could. He wasn't just a movie star. He was a man with a code, a man who believed that talent without discipline was wasted, that success without humility was hollow, and that showing up on time, prepared, and with respect for everyone around you was the true mark of greatness. In an industry built on image, Newman's list was one of the rare things that was completely real, and that's why it matters.